How's it going, everybody? Daner here with North Central Coins, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the most rare and valuable coins in Canada. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a classic that every collector loves, the Canadian penny. Now, even though they're no longer in circulation, there are still plenty of Canadian pennies out there that could be hiding in your collections or change jars, and they are worth a lot more than 1 cent. In today's video, we're going to break down 10 of the most valuable Canadian pennies that you can find. Some of these have rare minting errors, others are key dates with extremely low mintages, and a few have unique varieties that collectors are willing to pay big bucks for. If you have any of these in your stash, you might be holding on to a surprisingly valuable coin. Before we do get into this, I would really appreciate if you guys would smash that thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and also ring that bell notification so you can stay up to date with all my new content. And make sure to stick around until the end of the video because a couple of these pennies are worth some extreme buku amounts of money. And then without any further ado, what do you say we get right into this? These are 10 valuable Canadian pennies that can make you some big money. Let's get it, guys. The penny, or 1 cent, a coin no longer produced for circulation in Canada, held a value of 1 cent or 1/100th of a dollar and was minted from the years 1858 until 2012. Despite its official term as the 1 cent piece, the commonly used terms were penny and cent. This adoption was likely due to Canada's previous use of the British monetary system before the year 1858. Mass production of the Canadian penny ceased in May 2012, with distribution halting in February 2013, though it remains legal tender. After its discontinuation for general circulation, vendors weren't obliged to return pennies as change, leading to the rounding of purchases to the nearest 5 cents. However, goods can still be priced in 1 cent increments, allowing for exact payments in non-cash transactions like credit cards. It is important to note that while pennies ceased production for general circulation in 2012, they continue to be minted annually for special collector sets. These sets cater to numismatists and collectors who value the historical and artistic significance of the 1 cent coin. Canadian pennies have featured various designs over time, with Queen Elizabeth II depicted on the obverse since the year 1953. A notable reverse design in the year 1967 commemorated Canada's centennial with a depiction of a rock dove, a departure from the usual maple leaf motif. Most pennies have a round, smooth edge, but those minted from 1982 to 1996 were 12-sided to aid the visually impaired. The coin reverted back to a round shape in the year 1997 due to production challenges. The first Canadian cent was minted in 1858, which aimed to stabilize Canada's monetary system, which had relied on various currencies. Initially larger, these coins were later reduced to the size of the modern or American 1 cent coins in 1920. Now, the 1858 Canadian large penny struck in coin alignment presents a fascinating deviation from the more common metal alignment version. This particular coin stands out not only for its incredible rarity, but also for the intriguing questions that it raises about the minting process and the reasons behind such a distinctive die axis. Now, the 1858 Canadian penny should have a diameter of approximately 1 inch or 25.4 millimeters. The obverse side features the bust of Queen Victoria wearing a laurel wreath in her hair with a beaded circle. The reverse side typically displays a serpentine motif of 16 maple leaves within a beaded circle. The coin's alignment refers to the orientation of the obverse and reverse dies when the coin was being struck. In metal alignment, both the obverse and reverse dies are oriented in the same direction, resulting in the images on both sides of the coin being upright when the coin is flipped. This is the standard for most Canadian, British, and Australian coins. Now, on the other hand, there is coin alignment, wherein the reverse die is rotated 180 degrees relative to the obverse die, causing the reverse image to be upside down when the coin is flipped. This is typical of American coinage. The reason behind the coin alignment version of this 1858 large penny could be multifaceted. One possibility is that it could be an early strike or pattern coin that was produced during the experimentation phase of the minting process. Mint officials may have been testing different die orientations to assess their impact on the striking process, coin quality, or efficiency. Another reason could be to differentiate these coins from the more common issues that were struck in metal alignment. If any of these 1858 pennies were struck very early or late into the year, they may have used a different die access to differentiate them. Some of the other reasons there could be variations in die alignment could be attributed to inconsistencies or changes in the minting machinery, adjustments in production techniques, or even errors during the minting process. These factors, combined with the limited technology and quality control measures of the time, may have contributed to the occasional production of coins with different die orientations. Now, some of the details and specifications for the 1858 Canadian pennies, if any of these are off, it may indicate that it is not an authentic example. Online auction sites like Temu, AliExpress, and eBay are absolutely littered with counterfeit examples of Canadian coins, and this is one that could very well probably be found on there, so you definitely want to do your due diligence and make sure that all of these specifications are bang on to make sure that you have a legit example if you want to get a second opinion. Now, the overall mintage for the 1858 Canadian penny in metal alignment is 421,000, so it still has a relatively low mintage figure. It should have a composition of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc. Its weight should be 4.54 grams. It should have a diameter of 25.4 millimeters. The edge of the coin should be plain, and the standard issue is struck in metal alignment, but the rare variety that you are looking for is the coin alignment version, which means that the obverse and reverse will be rotated 180 degrees. Now, the designer for the obverse and reverse of the coin was Leonard Charles Wyan. Now, before we do get into the values for the 1858 Canadian large cent in coin alignment, I just wanted to mention that there are a few errors that you can look for on the standard metal alignment version of the 1858 large pennies, which gravitate around the stems and maple leaves on the reverse side of the coin. There is also a doubled 5 variety in the date 1858. I'm not going to go too in depth about those varieties today. Those will be saved for a separate video, but just because your 1858 penny isn't in coin alignment doesn't necessarily mean you can't make any decent money off of it if you have any of those errors or varieties. So make sure to stay tuned for the future videos where I will be covering those. But in terms of the value for the 1858 Canadian large cent struck in coin alignment, it is the most rare and desirable of them all, and it doesn't require much inspection beyond making sure that the obverse and reverse are rotated 180 degrees from each other, similar to how American coins are struck. Now, the great thing about this 1858 penny struck in coin alignment is it holds some pretty incredible value even on the low end. So if you are able to pick up some Canadian large cents in a bulk purchase, maybe on eBay or at your local coin shop, this is definitely one that you can cherry pick out and make a really good profit off of. Now, just to give you guys an idea, on the absolute very bottom of the Sheldon scale, for the most beat up and worn example, a regular issue of the 1858 struck in metal alignment can be worth around $30. So it is still fairly rare and can still have a pretty decent premium. With that low mintage figure of 421,000, it is pretty desirable. But if you can identify the coin alignment issue of this coin, it can be worth $400. Even if it is beat up, worn, and been put through the meat grinder, you can make some really big money off of this. Now, as we start to increase up in the grading tiers, the regular issue of the 1858 can be worth around $325 for an AU50, but the 1858 in coin alignment can be worth up to $7,500 for an AU50. So that isn't even the highest graded known example. We're starting to push the MS range, but not quite there. So your chances of being able to find an older coin that hits the MS range is not the best, but maybe if the coin gods shine kindly upon you and you are somehow able to find an uncirculated roll or bank bag of these, you could maybe find some that score in the MS range and they would be worth the buku amounts of money. Now, there currently aren't any graded examples of the 1858 in coin alignment that are in the MS range, but if you were able to find one, I don't doubt that you could easily get around $100,000, especially if it hits around the MS64, MS65 mark. It isn't too common that you will find older Canadian large cents that will hit in the MS range, but never say never. I have seen a few nice examples of some of the older Victorian large cents, and even if it isn't in great shape, you can still make $400 if it is the most beat up and worn example of the 1858 Canadian large cent in coin alignment. Prior to 1858, the Canadian monetary system relied heavily on British coinage, bank, and commercial tokens, known by their French name as sous, also US cash and Spanish milled dollars. These cents were initially established to bring some sort of order to the monetary system in Canada. With the goal of using these coins as measurement tools, the coin parameters were determined, and the public's acceptance of these tokens was severely hampered by their small weight when compared to the easily accessible bank and merchant halfpenny tokens of the time. The Dominion Government of Canada inherited the coins in 1867, and some of them were even sold at a discount of 20%. It wasn't until 1876 that the need for new cents with the weight increased to 5.67 grams became apparent. The diameter of a large cent from 1858 to 1920 was 23.88 millimeters or 0.940 inches, making them much larger than contemporary 1 cent coins and even much larger than contemporary 25-cent pieces of the time. These enormous large cent coins, which were produced after Confederation on British halfpenny planchettes, were issued and worth about the same value as the halfpenny. After being issued, they were in use in the province of Canada, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Prior to that time, British Columbia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland all continued to mint their own pennies until they joined Confederation. Eventually, the size of the penny was shrunk to its current size in the year 1920, making it more comparable to the American penny. Now, before we get into how to identify and value this coin if you were ever to find one, let's go over pattern or trial coins. Canadian pattern or trial coins are unique and rare coin prototypes created as part of the coin design and production process. They were minted to test new designs, metals, or production techniques before the mass production of regular circulation coins. These coins often feature experimental or alternate designs, inscriptions, or metal compositions. Some of the key features that can identify Canadian pattern or trial coins: they can have unique designs. Pattern coins frequently showcase unique or experimental designs that differ from the final versions of the coins issued for circulations. These designs may include variations in motifs, inscriptions, or even entirely new themes. They can also have a limited mintage. Pattern coins were often struck in very limited quantities, making them scarce and highly sought after by collectors. The low mintage figures adds to their rarity and value. They can be composed of various metals. Some pattern coins were struck in different metals or alloys, testing their durability and also appearance. These may include variations in copper, silver, gold, bronze, and other metals. They may have distinguishing markings. Pattern coins often bear distinguishing markings to indicate their experimental nature. Modern pattern coins can also include the words pattern or trial or test on the coin's surface. Historical significance. These coins provide valuable insights into the coinage development process, the evolution of designs, and also the decision-making of mint authorities. They are a window into the history of Canadian coinage. And also their collectible rarity. Collectors of Canadian coins value pattern coins for their historical significance and rarity. The value of these coins can vary widely based on factors such as the specific design, metal composition, condition, and also collector demand. Authenticity is also crucial when purchasing pattern coins, as counterfeit or replica pieces do exist. Now, to differentiate between the regular strike and the pattern 1911 Canadian large cent or penny, you need to flip over and look on the coin's obverse. The pattern or trial piece will include the inscription George 5th DEIGRA REX ETIND In contrast, the regular strike of the 1911 Canadian penny will not include the GRA, which stands for By the Grace of God in Latin in the inscription. It may be shocking that such a minor difference can bring such a substantial value and premium to this coin, but if you understood how rare this penny truly is, you might understand why people are willing to pay such buku amounts of money for one of these bad boys. Currently, there are only a few known examples of this coin, and they will receive the SP or specimen designation. Usually that is the designation that pattern or trial pieces will receive from PCGS. At this point, coming across large Canadian pennies or cents to search for errors or variations doesn't happen too often, even for those with some experience in collecting and coin roll hunting. But if you do want the opportunity to search some large pennies for holy grails like this 1911 pattern piece, I would suggest your best chance at this point would probably be to look for bulk lots on eBay, Facebook Marketplace, or even a flea market. Generally, coin shops will charge around $1 for an average condition large penny, so if you can find a bulk lot where you pay less than $1 per coin, you are not doing too bad. This 1911 pattern penny was produced at the Royal Mint facility in London, and because the obverse design was changing to accommodate the coronation of King George V, there were several tests conducted and many legendary coins were created, the most noteworthy of which would probably be this coin's big brother, the 1911 silver dollar, which is commonly acknowledged and referred to as the most rare and valuable Canadian coin currently in existence. So what do you say we discuss the specifications and potential value if you were ever to stumble across one of these legendary pennies? If any of the specifications are off, it may indicate that the coin is not legitimate or authentic. The 1911 pattern penny is composed of a bronze alloy which is 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc. It has a weight of 5.6 grams, a diameter of 25.4 millimeters, and is in metal alignment as is the standard for most Canadian coins. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, to identify this 1911 pattern piece, all you need to do is flip over to the obverse, and if it has the GRA, then you have one extremely rare Canadian penny that can be worth all the way up to $60,000 for an SP65. If you were ever to find one of these and sent it to PCGS to be graded, it would receive the SP or specimen designation. Currently, the highest graded known example is an SP65, but I'm going to give you the North Central Coins estimate. If you were able to find and identify one of these 1911 pattern pennies, I believe that it could truly be worth up to $100,000 for an SP67 example. So this coin, even on the lower end, is probably worth around $10,000. And as you start to go up into the MS range, you start to see some crazy money where it tops out at $60,000 for an SP65 example. The Royal Canadian Mint made the decision to switch from the large 1-cent coin to the smaller penny due to economic considerations and changes in the cost of production. The transition took place in the year 1920 when the Mint introduced a smaller version of the 1-cent coin. Here's a brief overview of how the process took place and some of the reasons for the switch. Cost factors. The primary reason for transitioning to a smaller penny was cost related. The larger 1-cent coin, also known as the large cent, was traditionally made of bronze and then copper and had a higher production cost. Metal composition. The large cent, which was introduced in the year 1858, was initially made of pure copper. However, during World War I, the Mint began using bronze, which is a copper alloy composed of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc. This change was made to conserve copper for the war effort. In the year 1920, the Canadian Mint introduced the smaller version of the 1-cent coin. The new coin retained the same bronze composition but featured a reduced size and weight. The transition involved a change in design as well. The obverse, also known as the head side of the coin, continued to feature the reigning monarch, but the design on the reverse was slightly modified to fit the smaller size. Now, some of the reasons for this switch. Cost savings. The smaller penny was more cost-effective to produce than the larger one. The reduced amount of metal required for each coin contributed to lower production costs. Economic efficiency. Smaller coins are generally more practical in terms of handling and transportation. They take up less space and are lighter, making them more convenient for daily transactions. Adaptation to economic changes. Economic conditions, including fluctuations in metal prices and the cost of production, influence the design to switch to a smaller coin that can be produced more efficiently. Now, there are several factors that can contribute to lower mintages for certain years for Canadian coins, which can make them much more rare and potentially valuable amongst collectors. Now here are some of the factors that could contribute to lower mintages for certain years for Canadian coins, which could potentially make them more rare and valuable to collectors. Economic factors such as periods of economic downturn or instability could impact the demand for coins. Lower economic activities might result in reduced coin production. Shifts in public demand for specific coin denominations or changes in payment habits could influence the need for certain coin denominations. Fluctuations in the prices and availability of metals used in coin production, such as copper and zinc, can affect mintages. Higher metal costs might lead to reduced coin production. Advances in minting technology and production processes can influence the efficiency of coin production. If the mint adopted more efficient methods, it might affect the overall mintage. Events such as wars, political changes, or other significant societal events can impact coin production. For example, during wartime, resources might be diverted for war efforts, affecting coin production. Technical issues, maintenance, or other challenges at the minting facilities could also lead to lower mintages for specific years. Also, the introduction of new coin designs or modifications to existing designs can sometimes lead to lower initial mintages as people adjust to the change. Collectors might also be interested in the first year for a new design. Some coins might also be hoarded or melted down for their metal content, leading to a reduction in the number of coins available for circulation or that are able to be collected. Now, the three most sought after dates when it comes to the King George V small cents and the coins that you are here to find out about are the years 1922, 1923, and 1925. Now, I'm excluding the 1936 dot from this list because it is a holy grail coin and it usually will come out of a specimen set. It is not saying that there might not be a few of them floating out there in the wilds of circulation or in a collection, but usually if you stumble across a coin like that, it is going to be a counterfeit. There aren't any notable errors or varieties known for the dates 1922, 1923, and 1925. Instead, their value actually comes from their incredibly low mintages. In the world of numismatics, considering how many billions of Canadian pennies were struck between the years 1858 until their discontinuation in 2012, with mintage figures floating around 1 million apiece, these are not only incredibly scarce compared to low mintage American coins, but also very rare and hard to find when it comes to collecting Canadian pennies. Now, some of the details and specifications for these coins, if any of these are off and may indicate that the coin is not a legitimate example. Online auction sites are rife with counterfeit coins, so these are a few that could be very suspect, especially if discovered in good condition in this day and age. If you do find any of these dates, you definitely want to get a second opinion. Now, I have actually ordered some counterfeit examples of some of the most rare Canadian coins of all time to give you guys an example of how bad this problem currently is. So stay tuned for that video. It's going to be released over the next couple weeks. Now, the specs and mintage figures for the 1922, 1923, and 1925 pennies are as followed. First, we will start with the mintage figures for these three coins. The 1922 small cent has a mintage figure of 7,601,627. The 1923 penny has a mintage figure of 1,019,022. The mintage figure for the 1925 is the lowest of the three. It has a mintage figure of 1,622. Now, the specifications for all three of these small cents are the same and are as followed. They all have a composition of 95% copper, 3% tin, and 1.5% zinc. They have a weight of 3.24 grams, a diameter of 19.05 millimeters. The edge is plain or smooth. They are in metal alignment, as is the standard for most Canadian, British, and Australian coins. The obverse was designed and engraved by Sir Edgar Bertram McKennell, and the reverse by Fred Lewis. Now, unlike many of the other coins that I cover on this channel, these coins are actually pretty valuable to find on the low end, especially for pennies. Even if you find them in absolutely terrible beat up condition and they have been put through the meat grinder, you can still get a couple of bucks for these coins. So first, we will start with the 1922 small cent. On the low end, it can be worth around $11 for an AG3. Now, that is at the absolute bottom of the Sheldon scale. Even though these pennies are a little bit older, I have known some people that have been able to find them. If you're able to get your hands on some wild penny rolls, or God forbid, a box of pennies from the bank, then you may just be able to get lucky and score one of these dates. Now, the 1922 can be worth around $29. $1.70 for an F12, and around $125 for an AU50. Now, as we start to get into the mint region, the 1922 can be worth around $231 for an MS60, around $1,380 for an MS63, and all the way up to $10,500 for an MS65, which is currently the highest evaluated example. Now, up next is going to be the 1923 Canadian small cent. It can be worth around $15 for an AG3, which is at the absolute bottom of the Sheldon scale. It can be worth around $40 for a VG8, and all the way up to $154 for an AU50 example. As we start to get into the mint range, the 1923 can be worth around $327 for an MS60, and all the way up to $4,530 for an MS64. So it is a bit more rare and valuable than the 1922, and it has a lower mintage figure, so that is not surprising. Now, last but not least, we have the 1925, which is probably the most rare and valuable standard issue King George V small cent. This is the one that everybody looks for. It is a key date for sure, with a super low mintage figure just around $1 million. Some of these were probably destroyed, which makes finding examples nowadays even harder, but I have known coin roll hunters that have discovered 1925s. Now, when it comes to value, it is actually only worth $12.80 for an AG3, so still very valuable for a penny on the low end, but not quite as valuable as the 1923. It can be worth around $31 for a VG8, and all the way up to $107 for an AU50 example. Now, as we start to get into the mint state region, the 1925 is worth around $227 for an MS60, $2,660 for an MS64, and this bad boy can be worth all the way up to $6,900 for an EF40. So when it comes to the values and prices of these pennies, they fluctuate pretty rapidly and they go up and down. It depends on the collector's market, but honestly, depending on which one you want the most, I would want to have the 1925. It has the lowest mintage figure, and currently an MS66 is the highest graded known example. But even though the 1922 isn't worth as much on the low end, it is actually worth the much on the high end, worth around $10,500 for an MS65. So that would definitely be a nice one to find if it was in good condition. In the year 1939, Canada entered World War II. This period saw global tension as Canadian forces, along with those of Great Britain, France, eventually the United States, and other countries fought against the Axis powers in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Although World War II ended in the year 1945, much of the world remained in a state of socio-political turmoil for several years following the war. While operations at the Canadian Mint in Ottawa, Canada's capital city, returned to normal, on the other side of the world, India, which was part of the British Empire, was experiencing social upheaval. A movement for independence, largely led by anti-colonial activist Mahatma Gandhi, achieved its goal on August 15, 1947, when India finally became a fully independent nation. India's independence had implications for the ongoing production of Canadian coinage. Starting in the year 1937, during King George VI's reign, Canadian coins featured an inscription on the obverse side reading Georgius VI Rex ETIND, which is an abbreviation for the Latin phrase King George VI by the grace of God and Emperor of India. By the year 1948, new dies reflecting India's independence had not yet been prepared at the Royal Canadian Mint. As a result, the production of Canadian coins dated 1947 actually continued into 1948, and these coins would feature a small maple leaf to the bottom right-hand side of the 7 in the date. The limited mintage of Canadian coins in the year 1948 can be attributed to several factors, each playing a crucial role in shaping the production of coins during that period. The first was the change in inscription. One of the primary reasons for the reduced coin production in 1948 was the need to change the inscription on Canadian coins. Until that year, the coins bore the inscription ETIND, which signified that the reigning British monarch was also the Emperor of India. But in 1947, India gained its independence from British rule, and the British monarch was no longer the Emperor of India. This significant change necessitated the alteration of the coin inscriptions to reflect the new reality. The process of changing the inscription on coins involved the creation of new master dies and working punches. These tools were essential for minting coins with the updated design and inscription, replacing the ETIND-IMP. This process was time-consuming and intricate, leading to delays in acquiring the necessary dies and punches for the production of the coins with the new design. Due to the complexities involved in producing these new dies and punches, they were not actually available until late into 1948. This delayed the commencement of coin production with the updated designs, and as a result, coin production for that year had a late start, further limiting the number of coins that could be minted with the date 1948. Another noteworthy factor contributing to the limited coin production in 1948 was actually the lack of demand for dollar coins from specific regions in Canada. Cities such as Calgary, Halifax, St. John's, and Regina did not request any dollar coins for that year. This reduced the demand for specific denominations and also played a crucial role in the overall decrease in coin production. The scarcity of Canadian coins minted in the year 1948 can be attributed to the need for a significant change in coin inscriptions following India's independence. The time-consuming process of creating the new dies and working on punches, and also the late arrival of these tools, reduced demand for certain denominations in specific regions in Canada. These factors combined to make 1948 coins a unique and limited year in Canadian numismatic history, with relatively few coins minted compared to other years. Now, what makes these 1948 and 1949 pennies so special is not only their limited mintage, but also the fact that there are several different varieties that you can look for. These variations all gravitate around the positioning and size of the denticles and relativity with the text on the coin. The reason for all of these different varieties is they were probably doing some experimenting and trying to see what worked out the best, and they wanted to differentiate between the different coins that they were experimenting with, and the best way that they could do that is with changing the size and placement of the denticles and wording. So there are several different varieties for both the 1948 and 1949. There are 3 noteworthy varieties for the 1948 and 2 for the 1949. Now for the 1948, there are small and large denticle varieties, and it can affect the value depending on the size of the denticle. For the 1949, the size does not matter as much, only the orientation of the last A in gratia and relativity to the denticles. So what you want to do is look at the top of the A, and if it points directly to a denticle, then you have yourself one of the rare varieties. Now for the 1948, you want it to point towards a small denticle. That is the rarest of the 3 different varieties, and the A to the large denticle is also fairly valuable as well. Now with the 1949, you also want that last A in gratia to point directly to one of the denticles, and if you can identify that, it is the rarer of the 2 varieties. So what I'm going to do is give you guys some of the details and specifications for both of these pennies, and then I'll go through and read off the different values for the different and most valuable varieties that you can look for. So the 1948 and 1949 pennies are composed of 98% copper, 0.5% tin, 1.5% zinc. They have a weight of 3.24 grams, a diameter of 19.05 millimeters. The obverse was designed and engraved by T.H. Paget, and the reverse was designed and engraved by G.E. Gray. The edge of the coin is smooth, it is non-magnetic, and it has a diaxis and metal alignment, as is the standard for most Canadian, British, and Australian coins. So what I'll do is go through and give you guys first the low end values for the different rare varieties for the 1948 and 1949 pennies, and then I will give you guys the MS values for these coins as well. They can be super valuable if you do find them and they are in really good shape. And never say never, because I've done penny hunts and found some older George VI coins that were almost hitting the MS mark. So first we'll start with the 1948. Now, the rare variety that you want to look for the 1948 is the A points directly to the small denticle. Now, if you can identify that, it can be worth even $1 in a VG, which is pretty much the bottom of the Sheldon scale, not at the absolute bottom, but it is a pretty beat up and worn penny, and you are getting 100 times its face value. That is a pretty extreme premium, and you don't often see premiums like that at the low end for Canadian coins. Now, it can be worth around $30 for an AU50 example, and that is for the 1948 A points to small denticle penny. Now, for the 1949, you are looking for the A points to the denticle. This one is actually a little bit more rare and valuable than the 1948. This one can be worth around $6.70 in a VG8. So that is the same grade as the previous one. Not right at the bottom of the Sheldon scale, but pretty darn close. So even if you found one and it is beat up and worn, you can still get a couple dollars for this penny, which is a huge premium for a coin that only has a face value of 1 cent. It can be worth around $41 for an AU50 example, which is right before you hit the MS mark. So the 1949 A points to denticle is the rarest of all of these penny varieties that you can look for. Now, when you start to get into the MS range, the 1948 A points to large denticle is not quite as valuable as the A points to small denticle, but it is still worth some decent money. It can be worth around $6.50 for an MS60. It can be worth around $364 for an MS65, but then you see a massive price jump, as currently there is an MS66 graded example that is evaluated at around $1,620. So that tells you that there probably aren't too many high grade examples of this coin out there. So if you ever happen to come across any uncirculated rolls of 1948s or 1949s, don't think about them, buy them. But the rarer of the 1948s that you can look for is the A points to small denticle. If you can identify the last A in Gratia and it is pointing to a small denticle, it can be worth around $70 for an MS60 and all the way up to $882 for an MS65, which is currently the highest graded known example. Now, this one is at least twice as valuable as the 1948 A points to large denticle. It's worth around $521 for an MS65, but the previous A points to large denticle penny was worth $1,620 for an MS66. So considering that the highest graded known example of this coin is only an MS65, if you did ever find one of those and it did score any higher, you could easily be talking a $2,000 to $5,000 penny, and that is for the 1948 A points to small denticle. Now, for the 1949, you are looking for the A points to denticle. This one is actually the most rare and valuable of all of the different pennies that you can look for. It is worth around $70 for an MS60, and even though that is still technically a mint state penny, your chances of being able to score in the low MS region are not impossible when it comes to coins like King George VI. If you do happen to come across a penny box, or maybe you go to your local coin shop and you buy a big old bag of scrap pennies. That's what I have actually done in the past, and I found some really amazing stuff. So the 1949 A points to denticle can be worth around $71 for an MS60. So that could actually be a huge premium. Even if you sent this to be graded by PCGS, you could still make a profit off of this coin if you did identify a legitimate example. Now, the highest graded known example currently for the 1949 A points to denticle is an MS66, and it is currently evaluated at $13,900. That is a whole lot of money for a penny that you actually have a decent chance of finding. I have found plenty of 1949s in my coin roll hunt. I have not found any of the super rare varieties, but I will definitely keep my eyes open for this penny, and you guys definitely should too. It never hurts to be armed with a little bit of knowledge so you don't accidentally throw a coin back into circulation that could be worth thousands of dollars, if not more. If you happen to have any Canadian pennies lying around, I suggest you pull them out and take a little look through them, because believe it or not, there's one subtle detail on Canadian pennies from the years 1953 to 1955 that can make the difference between pocket change and the find of a lifetime. Before we discuss the 1955 pennies, first, I need to explain one of the most important design quirks that can be found in Canadian numismatics, and that is the shoulder fold versus the no shoulder fold varieties. These tiny differences, although small and subtle, could mean the difference between big bucks. So let's break it all down. It all started on February 6, 1952, when Queen Elizabeth II first ascended the throne after the death of her father, King George VI. That year, Canadian coins still featured King George VI's effigy, but the Canadian Mint needed a brand new portrait for 1953, and they had to get it just right. 17 plaster models of the new Queen's effigy were submitted from around the world, and after some deliberation, the Royal Mint in London chose the now iconic uncrowned portrait by sculptor Mary Gillick. But here's where things get interesting. For the first time ever, Canada was allowed to create its own obverse master tools directly from the artist's model, rather than using the dies from London. This was considered a historic move by the Canadian Mint, but it led to technical difficulties in producing the obverse portrait designs for Canadian coins. When production began, something became clear very quickly, and that is the relief of the Queen's portrait was too high. This meant that the finer details weren't striking properly, especially the fold in the gown on Queen Elizabeth II's shoulder. That is where Thomas Shingles, who was the Royal Canadian Mint's chief engraver at the time, stepped in. He retouched the design, adjusting the Queen's gown to better emphasize the fold, also known as the strap. This led to the creation of two distinct varieties of coins. Now, the easiest way to identify the difference between the shoulder fold and the no shoulder fold on your Canadian coins isn't actually to look at the shoulder itself, it is to look at a single letter on the obverse of the coin. What you want to do is flip over to the obverse and look at the letter I in the word DEI, which is part of the Latin inscription DEI Gratia. If the ends of the letter I are flared out and come to points, then it is the no shoulder fold variety. If the letter I is straight and blunt with no flaring contrast, then you have the regular shoulder fold coin. There are a few different methods for identifying the difference between the shoulder fold and no shoulder fold, but even on worn coins, this trick works like magic, and it is the go-to method for experienced collectors. The shoulder fold and no shoulder fold cent varieties even continued into the years 1954 and 1955, making those years just as collectible if you know what to look for. So why do collectors and numismatists care so much about this incredibly subtle difference? Well, it's an incredibly important part of Canadian numismatic history. One reason is because it was the first new monarch featured on coin designs in over a decade. This also marked a pivotal period when Canada became even more independent and less reliant on Britain for its coin production, which actually led to the mishap which created this variety. Now, depending on the denomination, year, condition, and whether it is the no shoulder fold or shoulder fold, the value of your coin can vary significantly. In some cases, the rarer no shoulder fold varieties fetch extreme premiums, especially in high grades. Even if your coin isn't worth a fortune, sometimes it's just fun being able to identify a hidden variety with nothing more than your eyes or zooming in with your phone, and being able to identify this variety with no more than your eyes and a little bit of numismatic know-how. The 1953 shoulder fold versus no shoulder fold debate might seem like a small detail, but in the world of Canadian coin collecting, small differences can mean everything. So the next time you're going through your change or your grandparents' coin jar, pay close attention to the I in the DEI on 1953 to 1955 Canadian coins, because it just might be the tiny clue that reveals a hidden gem. The 1955 no shoulder fold Canadian penny is one of the most desirable varieties in modern Canadian numismatics. While both the shoulder fold and the no shoulder fold varieties were struck in the year 1955 for the Canadian 1 cent coin, it is the no shoulder fold version that stands out for its rarity and collector appeal. This coin has become especially sought after due to its limited mintage and the visual subtlety that separates it from its more common counterpart. Now, the key difference between the two different varieties lies on the obverse in the coin, specifically in the inscription DEI Gratia. Now, as I mentioned previously, to identify which version of these coins you have, you want to look at the last letter of I in the word DEI. On the rarer no shoulder fold variety, the I will have flared or pointed ends, giving it a delicate serif-like appearance. On the shoulder fold version, which was introduced later that year to strengthen the design and reduce the die wear, the eye is blunt and squared, often described as straight or flat at the ends. Despite the name, the so-called shoulder fold actually refers to a thicker neckline or shoulder strap on the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, but it is the I in the DEI that gives collectors the clearest, fastest way to tell the two apart. Now, even for the most seasoned of collectors, finding a genuine 1955 no shoulder fold penny would feel like hitting the jackpot. But what if I told you that there is a lesser known variety that could increase the value of these coins, known as the Hanging 5? So far, the Hanging 5 variety has only been discovered on the more common 1955 shoulder fold penny. This variety is named for a small hook-like line that appears just above and to the left of the digit 5 in the date on the reverse side of the coin. This line resembles a thread or crack hanging from the top of the 5, hence the name the Hanging 5 variety. This subtle anomaly is likely the result of a die crack, which is a defect that occurs when a minting die develops a fracture or crack, transferring the unintended raised mark onto each subsequent coin that it strikes. While minor die cracks are relatively common in older coins, the specific position and shape of this one has caught the attention of collectors. Now, I'm not too sure what was going on at the Canadian Mint in the late 50s and the 1960s, but you can find all sorts of hanging digit varieties for lots of the different penny dates, and that includes 1962, 1963, and several more. I'm probably going to be covering some of those in a future video, so if you would like to see those, stay tuned. On its own, a Hanging 5 error on the less rare 1955 shoulder fold penny can give the coin a small value boost. However, if a Hanging 5 were ever confirmed on a no shoulder fold penny, which is a variety that's already prized for its rarity, the combination of these two anomalies could create a truly exceptional piece, possibly even a holy grail for Canadian small cent collectors. It would represent a crossover of both rarity and minting flaws that is incredibly hard to come by, and no such example has officially been documented yet. Whether you're new to coin collecting or a seasoned veteran, learning to identify these varieties is a skill worth having and mastering. Always check your 1955 pennies under good lighting or zoom in with your phone. You want to look at the last I in the word DEI on the obverse of the coin to determine if you have the shoulder fold or no shoulder fold variety. With so many pennies still floating around in collection jars, flea markets, and coin shops, the next great discovery could be sitting in someone's change jar just waiting to be discovered right now. Now, if you do think you have found a legitimate 1955 no shoulder fold penny, especially one with a possible Hanging 5, it is definitely a smart move to have it authenticated by a reputable third-party grading service like ICCS, PCGS, or NGC. And if you really believe that you may have found this coin and you are pretty sure that it is the variety that I am discussing, you could even take it into your local coin shop to get a second opinion. Confirming the coin's authenticity and also its condition is the first and most important step to realizing its full value. Now, before we do get into the values for the 1955 pennies, some of the details and specifications. If any of these are off, it may indicate that it is not an authentic example. The overall mintage for the Canadian 1955 penny is 56,403,193. That includes both the shoulder fold and no shoulder fold varieties. It is composed of 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc. It has a weight of 3.24 grams, a diameter of 19.05 millimeters. It has a current copper melt value of 3 cents Canadian per penny. The obverse was designed and engraved by Mary Gillick and the reverse by G.E. Kruger Gray, and the die axis is in metal alignment, which is the standard for most Canadian, British, and Australian coins. Now, what do you say we get into the values for the different Canadian 1955 penny varieties? First, we will start with the most common, which is the 1955 shoulder fold. So to identify this, you want to look at the last I in DEI on the obverse of the coin, and if it looks straight and blunt, then it is the shoulder fold, which is the most common. It can be worth around 4 to 30 cents for a circulated example. It can be worth around $11 for an MS64, and it can be worth all the way up to $1,250 for an MS67. And that might seem like a pretty good value, but to be honest, you're probably not going to be finding many 1955 pennies that are in that good of shape anymore. The next variety that we are going to discuss is the 1955 shoulder fold, and that is the hanging 5 variety. So once again, to identify the hanging 5 heir, what you want to do is look at the last digit of 5 and the date of 1955 on the reverse of the coin, and you want to look for a small hook-like line that is running from the top of the 5 and to the left. Now, if you can identify this on the more common shoulder fold variety, it can be worth around $18 for an MS64, so slightly more valuable than the more common shoulder fold without the hanging 5. And then last but not least, we have the 1955 no shoulder fold, which is the rarest and most valuable of the 1955 penny varieties that are currently known to exist. Now, if you are able to find the no shoulder fold variety on a 1955 penny, it can be worth around $150 to $600 for an even well-worn and circulated example. So even if this thing has been beat up and been put through the meat grinder, you're still going to be able to get around $100 for this coin. Even if you aren't able to get it graded, if you were able to find one of these and you posted it on an auction site, even like eBay, I don't doubt that you could easily get $100, as people probably want this to fill out their books and collections. If you are able to find one of these and it scores around the MS64 mark, it can be worth anywhere from $6,000 to $7,000. Now, just to give you guys a comparison, the regular shoulder fold variety is only worth around $18 in that same grade. So that is a massive, massive price increase. Now, I wasn't able to find any quotes or estimates for any higher grades than an MS64, but I don't doubt if it did score any higher, then you could get easily around $10,000 for the 1955 no shoulder fold Canadian penny. Now, as I mentioned previously, there currently aren't any of these known to exist with the hanging 5 variety, but if you were able to identify a hanging 5 on a no shoulder fold penny, it could make its value skyrocket. We could be talking a $50,000 coin, because having both of those attributes would make it a one-of-a-kind piece. The Canadian penny was officially released in the year 1858. Those were referred to as large cents or large pennies, and those remained into effect until the year 1920, when the size changed. The composition has changed many times over the years, with some of the early Canadian pennies being minted out of bronze or brass, and then eventually out of pure copper, and now out of steel plated with copper on the outside. The diameter of the penny has also changed over time, with 19.05 millimeters being the most current and well-known measurement, very similar to the American small cent. Even though the Canadian penny is no longer manufactured for circulation after the year 2012, it is still produced for collector sets, such as the specimen and proof sets released by the Canadian Mint. These collections frequently feature limited edition pennies to mark important occasions or anniversaries. Even though they aren't as widely available as they previously may have been, you can still discover pennies if you look long and hard enough. Despite its discontinuation, it still remains a highly collected item. Some of the places that you can get pennies here in Canada are from your bank by asking for a $25 box or some loose rolls, and first of all hoping that they have any, and secondly are ready to break procedure in order to give them to you. Unfortunately, every financial institution in Canada is obligated to return any pennies that have been returned to be melted down. Despite this, and also the existence of businesses like Brinks and Garter World, which also operate their own alloy recycling programs, you still may be able to find some pennies out in the wild today. Aside from financial institutions, you could always take a gander on Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji, and you can also check out your local neighborhood coin shop to see if they have any bulk pennies that you can purchase. Now that we've given you guys some information on the Canadian penny, what do you say we get into these 1962 penny errors and variations, because there are a whole lot that we have to cover here, and they can all be worth some really good money if you can identify any of them. So as I mentioned earlier, there are upwards of 10 different errors or variations you can look for when it comes to your Canadian 1962 pennies. The first are the hanging varieties, the most common of which is the single hanging 2. If you look above the digit of 2 on the reverse of the coin, there should be a little line that connects from the top of the 2, curving upwards and then horizontally to the left until it touches the maple leaf. This is the result of a die clash, and depending on how late into production the dies were used with this heir, the more significant it can become. There are also double and even triple hanging 2s, and the more of these die clashes or lines you can count, the more valuable this variety becomes. Then there's the missing M variety. Usually Canadian pennies will have the initial of MG at the bottom of the portrait of Queen Elizabeth on the obverse. In 1962, whether due to die deterioration or other technical difficulties, the M in the initial is actually not visible. This variety can also be compounded with the hanging varieties to make it a double heir and increase the value substantially. There can also be doubling on the final 3 digits of the date in 1962, and depending on how many of the digits are doubled and also the significance of the doubling, it can be quite valuable. The last 2 notable variations for the 1962 Canadian pennies are also by far the most cool, and those are the guitar and harp variations. As a guitar player my whole life, this is a penny that has been on my radar for a long time, and I still have not been blessed by one of these by the coin gods, but I know other coin roll hunters who have found them, so they are out there. To identify and differentiate between the harp and guitar strings, you have to look underneath the 1 in the 1 cent on the top of the reverse of the coin, and if there are lines running vertically from the 1 to the top of the maple leaf, then you have one of these 2 very rare coins. The harp lines or strings would appear wider and more spread apart and may not be running all the way down and making contact with the maple leaf. The guitar lines or strings would be more narrow and more pronounced and would run clearly, making contact with the maple leaf. The guitar is the rarer and more valuable of the 2 varieties, so that is the one that you want to look for, but finding either one of these would definitely be a nice little treat. Now that we've discussed how to identify some of these varieties, what do you say we get into the values for these pennies? First, we will discuss the 1962 single hanging 2. One thing I do want to point out as well is most of these pennies aren't worth too much on the low end. They aren't worth too much more than face value. You might be able to get a couple dollars for them if somebody really wants them or they're trying to fill a hole in their collection. But usually to get the most amount of money from the coins that I'm mentioning, you want them to be in a high grade state. So that means MS60 to MS67. So to identify the single hanging 2 1962, you want to look for the hook that connects from the top of the 2 to the bottom of the maple leaf. If you can identify that, it can be worth around $9 for an MS60 to an MS62 example. This one can be worth around $300 for an MS66, and it could easily be worth up to $500 to $750 if you were to find one and it scored an MS67, which is extremely hard for Canadian coins. It's very rare that Canadian coins score MS66 or MS67, but never say never. If you're able to find an uncirculated roll of these, there's no reason they may be able to score a high grade like the MS66 or MS67 territory. Then there's the 1962 double hanging 2. Now to identify this one, it'll be very similar to the single hanging 2, but you want to look for multiple lines. There should be at least 2 of them. And in terms of value, it can be worth around $800 for an MS67 example, so it is just slightly more valuable and rare than the single hanging 2 variety. And then there is the triple hanging 2. Now this one is much more rare than the single or double hanging 2 varieties. It's worth around $38 if you find one in an MS60 or MS62, but you see some massive price jumps with this coin. If you were to find one and it scored anywhere near an MS66 or MS67, it could easily be worth thousands of dollars. If it scored in the MS67 territory, you could easily be talking a $3,000 coin. This is a pretty significant error for it to have 3 die clashes and get the triple hanging designation. So definitely the hanging 2s are good varieties to look for. Then there's the 1962 missing M variety. To identify this one, you want to look at the bottom of the portrait of Queen Elizabeth. And in most cases, when you check for this heir, you're going to see the initials MG. But if you ever check and that M is missing, you have one rare 1962 penny that can be worth $377 for an MS66 example. And this coin could see a significant price jump as well. It could easily be worth up to $750 if it did score in the MS67 range. Now, even more rare and valuable than the missing M variety is the 1962 missing M with a hanging 2. Now, this would be known as a double error because it contains two significant errors. So to identify this, it needs to have the die clash, giving it the hanging 2, and it will also have the missing M for the initials MG. If you can identify both of these, it can be worth around $205 for an MS65, but it could be worth all the way up to $2,500 for an MS67 if you were to find one and it graded that high. It would seem that they were having a lot of problems with their dies in the year 1962, and your chances of being able to find some of these pennies, even with a double error, are not the worst ever. So keep your eyes out for a missing M and a hanging 2 on your 1962 pennies. Then there are the 1962s that can contain doubling on the final 3 digits. Now, if it has a double 2, it can be worth around $50 for an MS65. If it has a doubled 9, 6, and 2, so the final 3 digits all contain machine doubling or die deterioration, then it adds a pretty significant premium. It can be worth around $100 for an MS65, so the price actually jumps to 2 times the value if it only has doubling on the single digit. And it could easily see some massive price jumps and be worth up to $500 to $1,000 if it's scored in the MS67 range. And then last but not least, we have the 2 string varieties of the 1962 pennies, and those are the harp and guitar string varieties. Now, first is the harp variety. To identify this, you want to look below the 1 on 1 cent on the reverse of the coin, and there should be lines running vertically from the bottom of the 1 to the top of the maple leaf. The strings on the harp will look wider and less pronounced. This one can be worth around $380 for an MS66 example, but if you were to find one and it scored any higher, it could be worth up to $1,000 for an MS67. Now, the 1962 guitar variety is the rarer of the 2 string varieties for the 1962 pennies. It's worth around $100 for an MS64 example, so it's probably worth around $300 for an MS65. Currently, MS64 is the highest graded known example, so if you were able to find one of the 1962 guitar pennies and it graded any higher than MS64, then you would have one very, very rare coin that could easily be worth up to $1,500 for an MS67. To identify this, you want to look under the 1 on 1 cent on the reverse of the coin, and it should have lines running vertically connecting to the top of the maple leaf. The lines should be more narrow and more pronounced on the guitar variety. If you happen to have any old Canadian pennies tucked away in a jar, buried in a desk, or inherited from a relative, now is the time to pull them out and give them a close inspection. Because one incredibly rare piece from the year 1966 can make the difference between a common copper cent worth only a few pennies and one of the rarest finds in all of Canadian numismatics. The mid-60s were a pivotal era for Canadian coins. At the time, the Canadian Mint was moving away from the traditional compositions for the higher denominations, replacing silver with nickel for dimes, quarters, half dollars, and the silver dollar. During this shift, Canadian Mint engineers experimented with new compositions for the Canadian penny, exploring alternatives to the long-standing copper-bronze mix. That is where the 1966 pattern cent or pattern penny comes in. These coins are sometimes referred to as trial or test pieces, and this 1966 nickel penny is referred to as Charlton number DC-32. This coin was struck in nickel, which is a silvery gray metal, unlike the reddish-brown copper alloy used for regular pennies. Its existence captures a pivotal moment when the Canadian Mint was searching for its next generation of coinage. Although this trial piece never progressed to actual circulation, its significance has only grown over time. Finding information on one-of-a-kind rare coins like the 1966 trial or pattern test nickel penny can prove extremely difficult. Today, it's one of the least known test or trial pieces in Canadian numismatics, and only a handful of examples have been found and accounted for, if that. Here's some of the key things that you can look for that might help you spot this rare 1966 pattern penny versus the common copper bronze counterpart. First, the composition and color of the coins is completely different. The regular 1966 Canadian penny is struck in the common 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc, which is referred to as bronze. And the pattern 1966 penny is struck in pure nickel. So the easiest way to be able to tell if you have one of these rare pattern cents is to check the composition and the color. If it is the regular 1966 penny, it will be red or brown, and if you have the extremely rare pattern cent, it will appear silver. Another clear difference between the regular 1966 cent and the 1966 pattern nickel penny is the weight. The regular penny will have a weight of 3.24 grams, and the nickel pattern will actually come in slightly heavier at 3.5 grams. Regular 1966 copper pennies will not stick to a magnet, but if you find the 1966 pattern nickel 1 cent coin, it will actually be magnetic, so it will stick to a magnet. So if you are able to find a silver 1966 penny, the second test that you can do is try and see if it will stick to the magnet. So what is it that actually makes this coin so rare and desirable? The 1966 nickel pattern penny emerged from a period when the Canadian Mint was exploring new compositions for its lowest denomination. As higher denomination coins switched to nickel, this pattern penny was an experimental attempt to create a durable and cost-effective Canadian 1 cent coin. However, for reasons lost to history, possibly cost-related, engineering constraints, or public reception, this design and composition never progressed beyond the experimental phase. Today, examples of pattern test or trial coins are exceedingly rare. Based off of similar test, trial, or pattern coins, I would say that there are probably fewer than 5 examples of this piece in existence, if that. This coin's level of rarity, combined with its status as a relic of a pivotal era in Canadian coinage, makes the 1966 pattern penny one of the holy grails for any collector. So if you're like me and you have a big old stash of Canadian pennies from the 1960s, don't dismiss that odd silvery looking coin just yet. Even the most subtle differences, like the coin's magnetic properties, its color, and weight, might signal that you've uncovered one of the rarest and most significant pieces in modern Canadian numismatics. For the right collector, a 1966 nickel pattern penny could be worth thousands of dollars, and its allure goes far beyond its value. It's a piece of the Canadian Mint's experimental past, a relic of a time when every tiny design and material shift could have reshaped the future of Canadian currency. Now, some of the details and specifications of any of these are off and may indicate that it is not a legitimate or authentic example. Online auction sites like Temu and AliExpress are littered with Canadian counterfeit coins, and unfortunately, it's one-of-a-kind pieces like this pattern penny that fall victim to counterfeiting. So it's always important, if you think you have found something unique or special, to do your due diligence to make sure all of the details line up before you take it in to be appraised or send it in to be graded. So the 1966 nickel pattern 1 cent coin is classified as Charlton code DC-32. It has an alloy and composition of nickel, which will give it its silver appearance. It is magnetic, which means it will stick to a magnet, unlike the common copper penny from 1966. It should have a weight of 3.5 grams, which is 0.26 grams more heavy than the common 1966 penny. It will have a diameter of 19.05 millimeters. Now, what do you say we get into the current market values for this extremely rare penny? So if you're able to identify all of those factors and the specifications all line up, if you send this coin in to be graded, it is going to be classified as a specimen coin, as most test, trial, and pattern pieces are. But although they are classed as specimen coins, they actually did not come out of specimen sets. They are patterns, tests, or trials that were struck as an experiment at the Mint and were not meant to be released into circulation. So if you're able to find and identify one of these, if it scores around the SP63 mark, which is specimen 63, it can be worth around $1,500. If it scores around SP64, it can be worth around $2,000. And if it scores around SP65, you are looking at around a $2,500 coin, and that is currently the highest appraised price value for this piece. If you did find one and it scored any higher, you could see some little price jumps. We could easily be talking a $3,500, $5,000 coin if it scored in the high SP mark. Now, I do want to point out that your chances of finding coins like this in your pocket change or looking through your coin jars are pretty much slim to nil, but never say never. Some of the rarest coins of all time were discovered through pocket change and coin roll hunting. Even though extremely rare coins like patterns, tests, or trials were not meant to be released into circulation, it doesn't mean that a few of them didn't accidentally escape the mint facility, either snuck out by mint employees, or maybe they made their way into the big batches of pennies that were being struck. Regardless, they have been found and accounted for in the past, and the only way that you will ever be able to find one and make the big bucks is to know what to look for. In the vast realm of Canadian numismatics, the allure of air coins and minting oddities adds an extra layer of fascination for collectors. These anomalies, often the result of unique circumstances during the minting process, can yield coins with striking and perplexing characteristics. While some may argue that certain errors are deliberately created at the mint, the mystery and intrigue surrounding some of these coins remains undeniably captivating. These coins deviate from the standard production procedures, resulting in striking variations that set them apart from their regular counterparts. From misaligned dies to off-center strikes, each air coin tells a tale of its own, reflecting the intricate and occasionally unpredictable nature of coin production. Among the most intriguing specimens are those that exhibit oddities in their composition or design. These coins may feature double strikes where the coin design appears duplicated, or planchette errors, which are characterized by irregularities in the metal composition or the thickness of the planchette. Such anomalies not only add to the aesthetic appeal of the coin, but also serve as tangible reminders of the intricacies involved in minting. While encountering these air coins in everyday circulation is exceptionally rare, their discovery sparks excitement and wonder. Each coin represents a unique glimpse into the inner workings of the minting process, and also the craftsmanship and ingenuity required to produce currency. Considered to be prized possessions in any collection, Canadian air coins and minting oddities stand as testaments to the rich tapestry of numismatic history. Now, the 1978 double reverse die-cap penny air coin represents a remarkable and exceptionally rare find in the world of numismatics. One recognized example of this coin, a PCGS certified MS64 red and brown specimen, stands out not only for its pristine condition, but also for its unique air type. While similar double reverse copper cents exist, with approximately 5 known and certified, including a notable 1980 PCGS MS64 red variant that recently fetched an impressive $12,500, this particular coin distinguishes itself as the sole known example with a die-cap air. Despite being several decades old, the discovery of this extraordinary coin only recently occurred when it was officially certified by PCGS. Remarkably, it is the sole certified instance of a two-headed or two-tailed coin that also exhibits a die-cap error, making it an exceedingly rare and coveted addition to anyone who enjoys Canadian error coins collection. The probability of such a combination arising is extraordinarily low, further emphasizing the exceptional nature of this numismatic treasure. The allure of genuine two-headed coins is undeniable, with their scarcity adding to their mystique and desirability among collectors. It's essential to note that these authentic pieces are often mistaken for magician's coins, which are novelty items lacking any significant numismatic value. As experienced collectors continue to seek out rare and exceptional coins to enrich their collections, the discovery of a coin such as this serves as a thrilling reminder of the endless possibilities within the realm of numismatics. With its unique combination of air types and also its impeccable certification, this coin not only represents a tangible piece of history, but also a captivating glimpse into the coin minting process. The most notable sign of a die-cap error is that the coin will appear to be raised on one or both sides, almost like a miniature cup or cap. This is because the coin gets stuck in the coin press and continues to be struck multiple times without being ejected properly. Because the coin remains stuck in the press, the design on one or both sides may become distorted or elongated. You might notice that the details look stretched or flattened compared to a regular coin. Another telltale sign of a die-cap error is the absence of the raised rims that are typically found on the edge of a coin. Instead, the edges may appear smooth or irregular due to the repeated strikes in the press. If you do suspect that you have a die-cap error, it's helpful to compare it to other known examples or images online. This can help you to confirm whether the coin exhibits the characteristics typical of a die-cap error. If you are still unsure, consider reaching out to an experienced coin collector or professionals who specialize in these air coins. If you guys haven't, I definitely suggest that you go onto Facebook and check out my group, Canadian Coin Roll Hunters. If you guys find any oddities or Canadian numismatic treasures, you can just post it on there and you can get some second opinions on whether the coin is legitimate or not. Die-cap heirs are considered quite rare, and finding one with such distinct characteristics as a double reverse die-cap adds to its scarcity, with only a handful known to exist. Collectors are willing to pay a massive premium for the opportunity to add such a unique piece to their collection. The combination of being a two-headed or two-tailed coin along with being a die-cap heir makes this particular coin exceptionally rare. It's a one-of-a-kind numismatic oddity that attracts collectors who appreciate the novelty and intrigue of such pieces. Heir coins have always held a special fascination for collectors due to the unexpected and often visually striking nature of the coins. Collectors are often willing to pay extremely high prices to acquire these pieces, especially if they're well documented and authenticated by reputable grading services such as PCGS or ICCS here in Canada. As demonstrated by the recent sale of a similar 1980 PCGS MS64 red example for $12,500, coins with similar heir types can command significant prices at auctions and private sales. The rarity and demand for these coins drives up their market value, making them valuable assets and investments in the numismatic market. And I can personally attest that experienced collectors are willing to pay some pretty good money for these heir coins. One of the most profitable coins that I ever found in one of my coin roll hunts was actually a Greece heir quarter from the year 2002, and I sold it for somewhere around $50 to $75, and I think it actually had a value of somewhere around $75 to $100, but it was still a really good profit for me. I only paid 25 cents for the coin. So heir coins can be some of the most valuable and profitable finds that you can get in your coin roll hunts, or if you are searching through your pocket change. Throughout the 2000s, there was an ongoing debate about discontinuing the production of the Canadian penny due to its high production cost and perceived lack of utility. In mid-2010, the Standing Senate Committee on National Finance initiated a study on the future of the 1-cent coin. By December 14, 2010, the Senate Finance Committee recommended removing the Canadian penny from circulation, citing a century of inflation had eroded its value and relevance. Despite a 2007 survey showing that only 37% of Canadians used pennies, the government continued to produce approximately 816 million pennies per year, amounting to 24 pennies per Canadian. The Canadian Mint had to produce larger quantities of pennies as news of their discontinuation spread and they disappeared from circulation, with many being hoarded away. In the year 2011, the Canadian Mint minted approximately 1.1 billion pennies, more than double the 2010 production of 486.2 million. In late 2010, the Senate Finance Committee members estimated that on average, each Canadian had up to 600 pennies hoarded away, which had removed many from circulation. On March 29, 2012, the federal government announced in its budget that the penny would be withdrawn from circulation in the fall of 2012. The decision was based primarily on the penny's production cost of 1.6 cents. The final penny was minted on May 4, 2012 at the Royal Canadian Mint's Winnipeg facility and was entrusted to the Bank of Canada Museum in Ottawa. Existing pennies remain legal tender indefinitely, but were withdrawn from general circulation on February 4, 2013. Starting on that day, the mint began melting down an estimated 35 billion pennies that were in circulation. On this day, Google marked the occasion with a special Google Doodle. Cash transactions in Canada are now rounded to the nearest multiple of 5 cents, which is based on the total bill, with totals ending in 1 or 2 rounded down to 0, totals ending in 3, 4, 6, or 7 rounded to 5, and totals ending in 8 or 9 cents rounded up to 10. Now, let's briefly discuss double dies and machine doubling. Double dies occur during the die making process, which results in dramatic doubling on every coin struck from that die. This is due to the process of creating the coin die, which often involves multiple impressions from a working hub. If the hub or die shifts during this process, the finished die features 2 distinct impressions with separation between them, resulting in a doubled design, letters, or digits. There's also mechanical doubling, also known as strike, ejection, shelf, or shift doubling. This occurs when the die strikes a planchette and moves slightly or bounces during the striking process, which creates a flat shelf-like doubling effect. The effect is different on each of the coins struck and is considered a striking error rather than a variety. Understanding the differences and nuances between these types of doubling is important for coin collectors to accurately identify genuine varieties. Now, the 1999 Canadian penny error is a fascinating anomaly for Canadian coin collectors and enthusiasts alike. This error is characterized by machine doubling, specifically affecting the final 3 digits of 999 and the date of 1999 on the reverse of the coin. Now, to identify this error or anomaly, you need to closely examine the date of 1999 on the reverse side of the penny. Machine doubling, also known as strike doubling, typically occurs when the die strikes the planchette more than once due to die movement or misalignment during the striking process. In the case of this 1999 Canadian penny error, the doubling on the final 999 digits appears as a slightly shadowed or blurred effect. Unlike genuine double die errors, where the doubling is part of the die itself, machine doubling results in a flat appearance without clear separation between the original digits and the doubled ones. The occurrence of errors like this could stem from various factors during the minting process. One possibility is a die clash, where the obverse and reverse dies come into contact without a planchette between them. This collision causes the die to receive an unintended impression, leading to the doubling effect on subsequent strikes. On the other hand, it could be die wear or misalignment that could contribute towards the doubling that you can find on this coin. Understanding the potential causes of this error can shed some light on the complexity of the minting of coins and the challenges that are faced by minting facilities. Despite rigorous quality control measures, errors such as this can easily slip through production, making them highly sought after by collectors. In the numismatic market, the value of these error coins can vary based on several factors, such as the severity of the error, the coin's condition, collector demand, and market trends. While low-grade examples of this error may not be worth too much above face value, pristine examples with pronounced doubling can fetch higher prices among collectors eager to add such a unique piece to their collection. It is super essential for you to carefully examine the penny from this year to identify its unique characteristics. While the most notable error is the doubling on the 999 date, variations in machine doubling or other minor errors may also be present. Each coin tells a story, and understanding the nuances of these errors enhances the appreciation of this amazing hobby. Now, before we get into the exact values for the 1999 Canadian penny with doubling on the final 3 digits, some of the details and specifications of any of these are off and may indicate that the coin is not authentic or legitimate. Now, the mintage figure for the 1999 Canadian penny, this is without a P mint mark. The only way that you can get the Canadian P mint mark penny is out of a proof set. Now, the mintage figure for the 1999 circulation penny is 1,089,625,000. So that is a massive mintage figure for a Canadian coin. Usually Canadian coins will have much lower mintage figures than their American counterparts, and when they do make so many of a coin, it makes your chances of being able to find errors and varieties a lot better. Now, this coin is composed of copper-plated zinc. It has a weight of 2.25 grams, a diameter of 19.05 millimeters. It has a thickness of 1.5 millimeters. The edge is plain. It has a die axis and metal alignment, as is the standard for most Canadian, British, and Australian coins. The obverse was designed and engraved by Dora de Pedri Hunt, and the reverse by G.E. Kruger Gray. Now, unfortunately, as I did mention before, this coin does not have a very high premium on the low end. If you find a beat up and worn example, it is not worth too much above face value, but it is still a pretty cool error to identify, and I would still hold on to them, honestly, because some people might want to have them just so they can have some cool errors in their collection. But as you start to get into the mint state range, it can be worth some decent money. Just to give you guys an idea, the highest price you can get for the 1999 Canadian penny without any errors or varieties is somewhere around $65 for an MS67. Now, if you can identify the doubling on the final 3 digits of the date, it can be worth up to $100. So it is worth almost twice as much as the regular variety, and the value will only go up as time goes on. Depending on the severity of the doubling, it could add a premium to the coin, and if it scored any higher than MS67, you could easily be talking a $200 to $500 piece. The penny is a coin in Canada that is no longer in production and is worth 1 cent or 1/100th of a dollar. The official term for the coin is the 1 cent piece, but people commonly refer to it as a penny or a cent. This is because Canada used British pounds, shillings, and pence as coinage before the year 1858, alongside US decimal coins and also Spanish milled dollars. In French Canada, the penny is often called the cent to keep the English pronunciation. Some of the slang terms for the penny in Canada include the cent noir, or the sou noir. But the common Quebec French usage is the sou. This can be traced back to a lot of the early large copper pennies that were produced in Quebec, and these are actually usually commonly referred to as sou tokens. The production of the penny officially stopped in May of 2012, and the Royal Canadian Mint stopped distributing them in February of 2013. However, the coin is still actually legal tender and can be accepted at banks and financial institutions. Vendors and merchants are no longer required to return pennies as change for cash purchases, and after the year 2012, it has been encouraged to round purchases to the nearest 5 cents in Canada. I think it is honestly only a matter of time before this happens in the United States. I know people don't want it to happen, but economically, it makes a lot of sense. Even though most goods and products in Canada are rounded to the nearest 5 cents, goods still can be priced in 1 cent increments, and non-cash transactions like credit cards can be paid to the exact cent. Pennies minted in Canada from the year 1953 onwards depicted Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse of the coin. The reverse of the penny features a maple leaf design. In 1967, they actually featured the iconic rock dove, which was designed by Canadian artist Alex Coville. And from 1982 to 1996, the pennies are actually 12-sided to help the visually impaired identify the coin. In 1997, the copper-plated zinc coins produced proved difficult to plate in the 12-sided shape, so the mint reverted back to a round shape. In the year 1996, the Royal Canadian Mint changed the composition of Canadian 1 cent coins due to the increasing price of copper. They started testing new coins made of steel and using a new production method called multiply plating, which combines nickel and copper layers over a steel core. This method was also used for coins in other countries. The Royal Canadian Mint is innovative and offers a solution to save money without compromising quality. Coins produced with this method had a P added below the Queen's bust from the year 2001 to 2006, which was later replaced by the Royal Canadian Mint logo in the year 2006. The Canadian Mint also adapted this new technique for producing coins for various foreign countries, including Papua New Guinea, New Zealand, Ghana, Oman, Paraguay, Barbados, the Bahamas, and even more. This technique has several advantages, such as saving time and materials by using less nickel, copper, or bronze than other minting techniques. It is also faster than single ply plating. Additionally, nickel plate resists tarnishing better than cupronickel and ferritic stainless steel. The multiply plating technique also provides heightened security by customizing the thickness of each copper and nickel layer to create a unique electromagnetic signature, which prevents vending machine fraud. So between the years of 2000 and 2006, it was quite an experimental time at the Royal Canadian Mint for Canadian pennies, and because of this, 6 different varieties were actually created for the Canadian 2006 penny, and amongst those, there is a Holy Grail penny that can be worth crazy amounts of money. In the past, I've discussed some of the Holy Grail coins that have been discovered or that you can actually find, but there are a few modern coins that are as rare and valuable as the 2006 P non-magnetic Canadian penny. The thing about this coin is that you actually have a decent chance of finding one of them if you hunt pennies regularly. I have actually heard of Canadian coin roll hunters stumbling upon this rare gem. It is honestly one of the most well-known and looked for pennies in Canada that you actually have a decent chance of finding eventually. In terms of its scarcity, this penny actually reminds me a lot to the 1922 to 1925 George V pennies. These pennies, although extremely rare and hard to come by, are not impossible to find, and even in low-grade examples of both the 2006 P non-magnetics and also some of the early 1920s small pennies, they can all be worth minimum of $20 to $30, even at the bottom of their grading tier. So very similar values and scarcity for these Canadian pennies. So stay tuned, because I'm definitely going to be making some videos in the future on those early 1920s Canadian small cents. They can be worth just absolutely insane money. But what do you say we discuss the values and specifications of these 2006 Canadian pennies? Because as I mentioned, there are 6 different varieties, and some of them can be worth some okay money, some of them can be worth pretty much face value, and some of them can be worth a whole heck of a lot of money. And I'm also going to talk briefly about an extremely valuable 2005 Canadian penny out of a proof set that you should definitely have on your radar as well. So let's get into the values of these coins. I'm going to start with these 2005s because they're actually a little bit easier. Now, in terms of value, the 2005s are not too rare or too valuable, at least to find the business strikes or circulation examples. But there exists an extremely rare and valuable variety for the 2005 Canadian pennies, and it is actually a proof strike, and that is the 2005 P non-magnetic Canadian proof penny. Now, just to give you guys an idea of the values of the 2005 Canadian pennies, the 2005 regular Canadian proof strike, so no P mint mark, is worth around $1.95 for a PL64 example, and can be worth around $40 for a PL67. The 2005 P from the proof sets, the magnetic example, is worth around $1.45 for a PL64 and can be worth all the way up to $32.90 for a PL67. And then we have the 2005 P non-magnetic. Now, this thing is a holy grail. Your chance of finding it in a coin roll hunt is pretty much slim to nil, but never say never. I have seen much crazier things happen. Your best chance of finding one of these 2005 P non-magnetic Canadian proof pennies is to carry a magnet around with you, go to coin shops, flea markets, maybe check Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji and look for 2005 Canadian proof sets with P mint marks. And basically you just got to throw that magnet onto the penny. And if it doesn't stick to the penny, you might have a holy grail coin that can be worth $1,150 for a PL64 and all the way up to $3,290 for a PL67. This is one of the holy grails of the modern Canadian pennies. There were very few examples struck, so definitely keep your eyes out for 2005 P proof sets. And if you have a magnet with you, maybe just give that penny a little tap, and if it doesn't stick, then you might have a jackpot on your hands. All right, so what do you say we start going through the 2006 pennies? I'm going to discuss the compositions as well as some of the identifying factors of these pennies, so that way you can find the ones that are worth good money, because there are 2 of the 2006 pennies that can be extremely rare and valuable. So the first one that we are going to discuss is not going to be one of the rare ones, and that is the 2006 with a P mint mark, and this is a magnetic example. So to identify this, you want to flip over to the obverse and look for a little P mint mark under the bust of the Queen. It will also have a magnetic steel planchette. Now, in terms of value, it's worth around 5 cents for an MS60, so pretty much worth face value at the bottom of the MS scale, maybe slightly more. And this one can be worth $73.70 for an MS67 example, which is an extremely high grade example. Now, next up, we're actually going to discuss the rarest and most valuable of the 2006 Canadian pennies, and that is the 2006 P non-magnetic. So basically, to identify this one, you want to flip over to the obverse of the coin and look for a little P mint mark under the bust of the Queen. This coin will have a non-magnetic copper planchette. Now, one of the great things about the rare 2006 pennies that also makes them one of the most searched for pennies here in Canada when it comes to coin roll hunting is that they actually have a pretty decent value on the low end. Now, the 2006 P non-magnetic can be worth around $40 for a VF12, so that is pretty much at the bottom of the Sheldon scale. Even if it is absolutely beat up, sat in a parking lot, you're going to be getting $10 or $20 for this coin. People want them for their collection, and even though they are out there, they are honestly a unicorn, and you almost never stumble across them. So as I mentioned, this 2006 P non-magnetic can be worth around $40 for a VF example. It can be worth $132 for an almost uncirculated 50. And then on the high end, it can be worth $500 for an MS60 and all the way up to $2,000 for an MS65. This is a fairly recent penny. I have found coins much older in a high mint state before, so your chances of finding one of these and it actually being in decent condition is not too terrible, honestly. So always keep your eyes out for the 2006 pennies and throw your 2006 Ps to the side. Check them with the magnet, and if that magnet does not stick, then you have yourself one extremely rare coin. Now, next we'll get into the 2006s with the Royal Canadian Mint logo. Now, there is a non-magnetic and a magnetic. Neither of these are particularly rare or valuable. The first we will discuss is the 2006 non-magnetic with the Royal Canadian Mint logo under the bust. To identify it, you want to flip over to the obverse, look for the Royal Canadian Mint logo under the Queen's bust, and this will have a non-magnetic copper planchette. In terms of value, it's worth around 10 cents for an MS60, and it can be worth up to $45.30 for an MS67, which is an extremely high grade. And then we have the 2006 Royal Canadian Mint logo with a magnetic planchette. To identify this, you want to flip over to the obverse, look for that Royal Canadian Mint logo under the Queen's bust. It will have a magnetic steel planchette, and it can be worth around $1.95 for an MS60 and around $177 for an MS67. So this is definitely the rare of the two varieties. And it may be a good idea to pull a few of these to the side if you're a coin roll hunter. The 2006 Royal Canadian Mint magnetic seems to be the rare and more valuable of the two. And the last two varieties for the Canadian 2006 pennies that we are going to discuss today are the 2006s without any mint marks. Now, just like the previous four pennies mentioned, there is a magnetic and non-magnetic example for the 2006 Canadian penny with no mint mark. The rare one of the two is the 2006 magnetic. First, we'll discuss the 2006 non-magnetic. Now, to identify this, you want to flip over to the obverse of the coin, and there will be no P or no logo of the Royal Canadian mint mark under the Queen's bust, and it will also have a non-magnetic copper planchette. In terms of value, it's worth around 5 cents for an MS60 example. It can be worth around $47 for an MS67. So very similar prices on the high end for the more common of the 2006 coins. And then we have the second of the Holy Grail 2006 pennies, and that is the 2006 magnetic no mint mark. Now, to identify this, you want to flip over to the obverse of the coin, and you are looking for no mint mark under the Queen's bust. It will have a magnetic steel planchette. Now, it was not made in sets, it was only released in circulation. I have still yet to find either of these two of the rare 2006 pennies, but I shall keep looking, and maybe, just maybe, I will have my day. In terms of value, the 2006 magnetic no mint mark can be worth around $75 for an MS60 and all the way up to $863 for an MS67. This one isn't super valuable on the low end. It can be worth around $10 to $20 if it's in a low grade state. People still really want it for their collections. And because you almost never stumble across these things in the wild, people are always willing to pay a premium to add them to their collection. If you ever did find one of these, I would suggest trying to sell it on maybe eBay or Facebook Marketplace. That's usually where you get the most amount of money for these coins. You can maybe try taking it to your local coin shop, but they're usually not interested in varieties like this. They might pay you like a couple dollars or something like that if you're lucky. But your best bet for coins like this is to sell it on eBay or maybe an online auction to get the premium that you are hoping for.